Hey guys, this is Nate and
This is Jerold.
today we're going to take you through a journey of jazz music. We're going to go from early jazz all the way to current jazz, and we're going to talk about some of the stylistic aspects of this music. We're going to start in the late 1800s and early 1900s in this early jazz style called Dixieland music. They played this style of music in New Orleans and in bars and clubs around the South, and it's really early on. You know, at that time, the drum set, it wasn't exactly what we see today. There weren't big ride cymbals like this. They usually just had one small cymbal and maybe a snare drum. You might not even see a hi-hat until later on. That was kind of the first drum set. So you're not gonna hear me playing the ride cymbal jazz beat like typically. We're gonna be doing kind of an earlier version of jazz. So let's check it out. From there, jazz music started to develop and spread around the United States and become kind of a more popular and readily seen music. So the music went up north to the big cities, and instead of always playing it in bars and clubs, it moves to concert halls, ballrooms, and those situations for people to dance to or just sit and listen to it in a concert. So famous bands from that era, like the Woody Herman Big Band, the Duke Ellington Orchestra, the Count Basie Orchestra, these big bands had 16 people, 4 saxophones, 4 trumpets, 4 trombones, bass, drums, guitar, and piano, typically, if not more. So I'm going to play a little bit of this style of music. Now, one of the signatures of this drumming style is feathering the bass drum. What's feathering the bass drum? All it means is playing quarter notes on the bass drum, but really quiet, okay? And the reason they did this is because in the 1920s, they hadn't invented the bass amp yet. So in order for the band to feel like it had a low end, the bass player would team up with the bass drum who was playing the same rhythm, but at the same time, and it would give it that big, full sound that we're looking for. So here we go, a little bit of swing music. 1, 2, go. All right, from there, jazz developed even more. So after about 10, 20 years of playing in big band music, some of the members of the big band wanted a little bit more freedom to improvise, to play longer solos, to play different tempos, just generally freer improvisation. So some of the members of these big bands started to get together in smaller ensembles like quartets and quintets to play this style of music called bebop. Now, bebop is really related to swing music, except because there weren't 16 people, there were just 4, it allowed for freer improvisation, more interaction in the music, faster tempos. Now, in this era, they no longer feather the bass drum as much. Instead, they do comping, accompaniment in the snare drum and on the bass drum, but intermittently, not constantly like we just heard in the swing music. So let's hear a little bit of bebop. This is gonna be a quick one. Ready? After the bebop era, around the 1940s, the music developed for another 10, 20 years, and musicians started to evolve about what they wanted to play. So there's an era of jazz music after bebop called post-bop. Now, post-bop can mean many different things because after bebop, a lot of musicians, a lot of these bebop musicians started branching out into a lot of different directions. So you'll hear musicians like the John Coltrane Quartet, which is post-bop, and you'll hear the Miles Davis Second Quintet, which sounds totally different. It's also considered post-bop. And you'll hear piano trios like the Bill Evans Trio, also considered post-bop. All of these sound very different because jazz started branching out into many different sounds, many different styles, and individual artists had very individualistic styles. In this era, you heard a lot of different influences too, like the influence of Latin music was really big in jazz music. So you would hear a lot of combinations of swing, like bebop style swing, with Latin influences and phrasing. So I'd like to demonstrate that. This is a little bit of post-bop music. So after post-bop, the music kept developing. And for a lot of musicians, it developed in a way where they wanted more freedom and a little bit more abstraction in their music. So the rhythm playing was no longer so steady and so repetitive. They started to break up the rhythm more. The pulse is still there, the beat is still there, but we would break it up in a way that was not so obvious and not so consistent. This created a feeling of extreme freedom because there was so much space between the notes and you could use a lot of different rhythms, a lot of different textures to improvise. So we're gonna demonstrate that a little bit. 1, 2, 3, 1. All right, we're moving up to like the 70s and 80s now. After being influenced by rock and pop, and in these common times like hip hop and soul music, R&B music, the backbeat started showing up a lot in jazz music. So musicians started improvising with the values of jazz like solos, listening, interaction, but instead of doing it over a swing beat, they started to be influenced by these beats with backbeats and kind of groovier sounds. So let's try that. 1, 2, 3. And there you have it. That's a bit of the history of jazz, about 100 years of music in a very brief period. I hope that sparks your interest to explore jazz music a little bit more.